All right, welcome back. Good morning, maybe, time. So today we're going to be going over the first section in Unit 9, The New Frontier, Camelot and the Kennedys. So we're going to hit some of Kennedy's presidency this unit. We hit a little bit of it last unit, and we'll kind of talk a little bit more about it next unit because he kind of straddles a lot of important things. It's a short presidency. Not even the full 4 years, but it affects a lot of things sort of going forward. Kennedy's a very famous president for a lot of reasons, not just because he was assassinated. So let's start with the 1960 election, Kennedy versus Nixon. So we have the issues on foreign policy. Nixon thinks that America's doing great and everyone loves us, and we're just going to keep doing what Eisenhower did. We all like Ike, I like Ike, you like Ike. Let's keep doing what Ike did. And Kennedy, on the other hand, says that America is losing ground. America is losing respect around the world, and we have to be more involved in what's going on around the world. And John F. Kennedy, that meant fighting the Cold War even heavier than we already were. So the economy, this might sound familiar if we remember back to the 1932 presidential election. Hoover versus FDR, because Nixon here says, look, the responsibility of economic growth is on private businesses, private property owners, private, the economy. So, people buying and selling stuff, you having a job, you making choices what you're going to buy and sell. Individual effort and individual entrepreneurship will grow the economy. So kind of like Herbert Hoover's attempts to sort of originally deal with the Great Depression. Kennedy says the government's got to take charge. We got to have another New Deal. We got to have another fair deal. We got to do a new thing. Now we weren't in the middle of a Great Depression, obviously, so it's not exactly the same as Hoover versus FDR, but this is a similar argument being made. And on national defense. This one, if Nixon being the Republican and Kennedy being the Democrat, this is definitely not how you'd see it play out in 2020, 2024 would be our next presidential election, I guess. Nixon says, look, we're good. Our army is great. It's fantastic. We have kept up with the Soviet Union. If it came to fighting the Soviets, we'd win. So we don't need to spend too much money on the military. And President Eisenhower, on his way out of office, and we'll talk about this a little more in class, on his way out of office, said that we need to avoid a military-industrial complex. We can't be at war all the time because then people will rely on making their money by us being at war all the time. And that's kind of what Nixon's going with this. It's like, look, we have a big enough military, we're spending enough money on it, we're good. Kennedy, the Democrat in this case, he's a cold warrior. He wants to fight this Cold War. He says there's a missile gap between us and Russia. They have more missiles than we do, and that is unacceptable. Now, we have enough missiles to nuke all of Russia by this point, but Russia has more missiles than we do, so we need to have more missiles than we have. There is no limit to the amount of money Kennedy is going to spend on this project. Nixon has limits on the amount of money he's going to spend on this project. So those are some of the issues that are sort of being thrown around. Obviously, it's a bit more complex than that. Obviously, there was more going on in the election, but those are some of the basic issues they were arguing. Now, another famous thing about the Nixon and Kennedy election were the debates. Now, there had been debates before in presidential elections, but this was the first televised debate. So, not everyone had a television by this point, right? A lot of people did. It was black and white, as you can see from the film here. But the people that, the sort of common story, and if you talk to people from the 60s, some of them will say it kind of went this way. Some of them will say, no, not really, and there's some historians that kind of are kind of poking holes in this theory. But the current, sort of thing in history is that the people who listened to the debate, like on the radio, thought, man, Nixon did a fantastic job. He knew what he was talking about. He knew the issues. Kennedy was a little, not that he wasn't smart and on top of things. It's just Nixon sounded better prepared. Nixon sounded more professional. Nixon sounded more ready to be president. But if you watched the debates on television, Kennedy came across as this young, vibrant, healthy man, and Nixon looked bad. He looked like he was sick. He looked like he was sweating. And he wasn't sick. He was sweating. He looked really bad because he refused to wear makeup on stage. If you're going to be on television in a studio like this with the bright lights, I don't care if you've never worn makeup before in your life, you're going to want to wear makeup. Otherwise, you're going to look like a ghoul. And Nixon did. And Kennedy, of course, being that young, vibrant person who's used to being on camera and sort of in the celebrity, he wore makeup, for the debate, which you're supposed to do on television. And also his campaign bribed some of the people on set to crank the heat up. And so Kennedy was wearing like a light suit. Nixon was wearing a heavier, probably wool suit. And so playing a little dirty with the fast and loose of the rules. So Kennedy does win. 303 to 219 to 15. Harry F. Byrd, the Southern Democratic candidate there in a few of the southern states, he gets a few electoral votes. This is the last serious challenge of the Dixiecrats, these Southern Democrats that were anti-civil rights. This is when, for the most part, the Democratic Party is going to be the party of civil rights. Nixon takes note of this in this election. He loses this election, but he'll be back and he'll win an election in large part by getting all of those Southern Democrats with what he calls the Southern strategy, and we'll talk about that when we get there. So Kennedy wins the presidency. He's a cold warrior. He wants to fight the Cold War. Remember, a few elections ago, the Democrats were labeled as soft on communism. So Kennedy his vow is basically never, ever, ever to be called soft on communism. So the Bay of Pigs invasion, 1961, the plan was to hire a bunch of Cuban exiles to overthrow Fidel Castro in Cuba. It does not work at all for a whole lot of reasons. But basically what it did is it turned Cuba closer to the Soviet Union, and it eventually leads to the Cuban Missile Crisis the next year. Would Russia have been able to put missiles in Cuba without us rolling in and trying to conquer Cuba and overthrow the communists? Maybe not, hard to say. So we've already talked about the Cuban Missile Crisis. We talked about it in a lot more detail last unit, but this is when it happens. It happens kind of because of the whole Bay of Pigs disaster. So if you need more information on that, swing back by last unit. The New Frontier. This picture here. This is one of the reasons why the White House was called Camelot, while John F. Kennedy and his wife Jackie Kennedy and his kids and the dogs are living there. They're this young, vibrant, healthy-looking couple. Healthy-looking. Kennedy's health was in really bad shape. Illness, war injuries from World War II. So he's in rough shape health-wise, but he looks young. He looks healthy. He looks happy. It's kind of why it's called, Camelot. Now, Kennedy has bold plans. He is 43 years old when he's elected, the youngest president we've ever had, except maybe Barack Obama. Actually, I think Obama was 44. Anyway, doesn't matter. The youngest president we had for a very long time, and he promised what he called a new frontier, kind of like the New Deal, but the new frontier, bold new changes to the country. We're going to go out into this frontier. We're going to explore the unexplored. We're going to have the federal government help people pay for their education. We're going to have the federal government help pay for their health care. We're going to have the federal government help pay for urban renewal, really rebuild the cities that are falling apart. We're going to support civil rights. And we're going to land on the moon by the end of the decade, not because it is easy, but because it is hard. We'll watch part of that speech in class. It'll make more sense then. So the harsh realities of what actually happens. The Democratic Party is really, really deeply divided on civil rights issues. So the Dixiecrats, the Southern Democrats, your Strom Thurmonds, your Harry Byrds, they do not want anything to do with civil rights because, they've got these things in the South. Now, plenty of Northern Democrats aren't super on board with civil rights, and we'll talk about that, when we talk about the civil rights of the era. But, there was definitely a wing of the Democratic Party that was very much pro-civil rights, and Kennedy was trying. He wasn't super pro-civil rights himself, but his brother, Robert F. Kennedy, who we'll talk about, was really, really big on civil rights and really pushed his brother to, support it, which is good. The Democrats from the old Confederacy, the Dixiecrats, they're not going to vote for these policies. And the Republicans aren't going to vote for these policies either, because they remember what happened with FDR. He got a whole lot of power, and he got really popular, but he also took a lot of power for the presidency and sort of away from Congress. So the Republicans weren't about to support another attempt at something like this, just like they weren't when Truman tried it. And the Dixiecrats sort of join up with the Republicans, and most of Kennedy's plans don't happen. Or if they do, it's a very small version of it. Now, what Kennedy does succeed at, two big things. One, the economy grows under his direction, spending a lot of money on the space race and the military. Right? So the government's spending a lot of money, but we're paying our scientists, and we're paying our factory workers, and we're paying our soldiers, and they're going to spend money on things. So that kind of keeps the economy going. So not bad. Now, plenty of economists and historians would say, well, it doesn't matter what Kennedy would have done. The economy was booming because of all the money we're getting from Europe and rebuilding things and all this other stuff going on. But he certainly didn't get in the way of that economic success. And his space program did land on the moon before the end of the decade. He did not live to see it, but he called that shot, that moon shot. Okay, so let's talk about the assassination. We'll be zooming in on this during class because this is important for a lot of reasons. It happened in Dallas. You don't even have to drive an hour to get to the exact spot that he was shot and killed. So here's the facts that we know. There's video evidence that we had, the things that we know that have happened. It happened on November the 22nd, 1963, also the name of a Stephen King book, which is, strangely, about the assassination of President Kennedy. Lee Harvey Oswald fired 3 bullets at the president's motorcade. 1 struck President Kennedy in the neck, and then Governor Connolly in the back. So 1 bullet hit the 2 of them, and that's not as weird as it sounds. We'll talk about it in class. 1 struck President Kennedy in the head. That's the fatal shot. That's the one you've probably seen in the video. And 1 shot missed. So 3 shots were fired. 2 hit their targets. 1 missed. So we've got 2 videos we're going to be watching that kind of talk about what the conspiracy says and why, the evidence that the conspiracies kind of overlook or that they didn't understand, and sort of re-looking at these documents, re-looking at these at the evidence. We're really kind of able to debunk a lot of the problems these people have with the conspiracy theories. So we'll talk about this in class, the importance of understanding the documents you're looking at, of really testing your theories, of really, really looking at the stuff that you're seeing and that you're being told, and really, really, really paying close attention to what's going on. Because it's easy to get some incomplete facts and go, oh, that's super suspicious. But when you get the whole story, it's that's, that was a lot of failures that day. A lot of things went wrong that day, but definitely something that could have happened. So next time, we're going to talk about President Johnson, the Great Society, and those programs, and Johnson on civil rights, and we'll be doing a DBQ pretty soon, featuring all that stuff. This is, by the way, President Johnson being sworn in on Air Force One. That's Jackie Kennedy standing right next to him, still in the same clothes that she was in when she was in the car, and her husband was killed. Weird time for America. If you've got any relatives that were alive at this time, ask them what they were doing when they heard the news. They will remember. They will be able to tell you exactly what was going on that day when they heard the news of John F. Kennedy being assassinated. So we'll talk about Johnson. We'll talk about the Great Society. We'll talk about civil rights, all starting next time on U.S. History.